Hi, I'm Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here today with my February reading wrap-up. I enjoyed some great books in February, however, not all that many. I have two books that I thought I would finish in February that I haven't yet, so they will go into March. So I only finished 5 books, but I think March is going to be a pretty big reading month. Between middle grade March, I can fit in more middle grade books, and my reading for Booktopia, and finishing these two that I'm halfway through now. So March will probably be a big one and make up for it. During February, I finished participating in the Mardi Gras Readathon, which ended on February 13th, which was Mardi Gras Day this year. So I'll mention that as I review what I read. Although the Mardi Gras Readathon actually began in January. Mardi Gras season starts on January 6th every year. And so some of the books that I read for the bingo, for Mardi Gras Readathon bingo, were actually read in January, like As They Were by M.F.K. Fisher. That counted for both food and set in France. And Look on the Bright Side, that was a middle grade, I guess it's more YA graphic novel about a crew or a group of friends. Oh, and the other thing that I did in February, as I usually do, was to focus on Black History Month. I didn't have a real solid plan at the beginning of the month for that, but it worked out perfectly. So my first book read in February, perfect for Black History Month, and just an outstanding book overall, was Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. I know everyone else has read this by now. Just in case I'm not the last person on earth to read this, it is an epic family drama that begins in 1770s Ghana with two half-sisters who don't know each other. They are brought up in different villages, in different empires or kingdoms as they were known at that time. They are named Effia and Essie. This novel follows 8 generations that begin with these two women. So there are 2 bloodlines of 8 generations, beginning in 1770s Ghana and going all the way to modern times. So it is sort of like separate stories that connect together. Don't worry, there is a family tree at the beginning, which I found extremely helpful. And so with each new chapter, you get the perspective of a character from the next generation. And then each section contains 2 perspectives from that generation, one from each of the bloodlines. I suppose that sounds confusing, but it's really not. It is beautifully done. The writing is just gorgeous in this novel. And I worried at first, when I realized what the framework was, I worried at first that I might not like the, getting to know one character and then leaving them. And true, I always hated to leave the character I was reading about, but each generation connects to the one before it. As the reader, we see it all, so we see those connections, even if the characters themselves don't. And, with each new generation, I was just fully immersed in their stories as well. So in the beginning, in the 1770s in Ghana, Effia, one of the half-sisters, marries a white man, the British governor of Ghana, and goes to live in Cape Coast Castle. So that's how her family begins. The other sister, Essie, is kidnapped from her village, which was a common occurrence at the time, even before the colonists arrived, was kidnapped and taken as a slave. But by this time, with the British there, she was taken with a group of others, tied together, made to walk dozens of miles through the jungle to Cape Coast Castle, where she didn't know it, but her half-sister was living in this beautiful place and being treated very well by her husband, whereas Essie was a prisoner in the dungeon underneath the castle under horrific conditions, and of course was sent to the United States as a slave. So that's how the two family lines begin, very, very different, and you get to follow each of them through the generations. The word I keep coming back to with this book is just stunning. The scope of it, the writing, the characters, it's so thoughtful and thought-provoking. Just an absolutely stunning novel. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend that you make room for it sooner rather than later. My first audio listened to in February was Last Summer on State Street by Toya Wolf. This was kind of a surprise. I downloaded it years ago when the publisher offered it for review. I think it was a 2021 release, but then had forgotten about it. I don't remember hearing anything about it, like in the reading world, in the blogging world, or the booktube world. It was a fabulous novel. It takes place in 1999, focused on 4 little girls, friends, young girls, who are, they're 12 years old when this story begins, mostly 12, and they are living in a Chicago housing project. So the narrator is 12-year-old Fifi. Her best friends are Precious and Stasha. The 3 of them love to jump rope. They're close friends. The environment they're growing up in is pretty awful. Lots of gang violence. The girls can't play out on the playground because that's where the gangs and the drug dealers do their business. But there is a spot in their building with a large enough area where they can jump rope and play double dutch. And one day, Fifi invites another girl named Tanya to join them. So she knows Tanya from school. She's seen her around their building. She knows that she moved from one of the other buildings. And that's what else is going on here during this Last Summer on State Street. Their housing project is being demolished one building at a time by the Chicago Housing Authority. So these young girls are trying to just enjoy their childhood, but around them is all this gang violence. They're seeing other people just like them being kicked out of their homes, being relocated. They can see the demolished building across the street that was identical to theirs. They know their building will be next. So all of this is going on. It's a coming-of-age story as these 4 girls are forced to leave their childhood behind. A lot of bad stuff happens, of course, because of what's going on around them. You know from the beginning that Fifi's going to turn out okay because she's narrating it as an adult. They discover throughout the summer, they already knew that Stasha's mother and all of her older siblings are involved in the gang that's there. They find out as they get to know Tanya that her own mother's a drug addict. So 2 of these girls are not at all cared for, but there are a couple of loving, protective parents in this story. So it is a story of this time and place. It was perfect for Black History Month. It's modern history. And I mean, it's not just history because there are still housing projects and there are still things like this going on. And a very powerful, poignant story. Really enjoyed that. Next up was New Orleans Morning by Julie Smith. This was the read-along for the Mardi Gras Readathon. And it's a book that I already owned. We used to live in New Orleans. We moved here in 1990, which is about when this book, well, it was published in 1991. So I probably read it around 1992, shortly after we moved here from New Orleans. I remember at the time, my husband and I both read it. It's a mystery novel. We both loved the suspense and the mystery, but also the setting in New Orleans. I didn't remember much about it. I loved revisiting this book and rereading it. It is a wonderful mystery with lots of suspense. It's the first book in a series, which I'm not sure I knew because I never read any of the others, but now I want to. So it features a policewoman in New Orleans named Skip Langdon. At the beginning of this novel, there is a murder, of course. It happens on Mardi Gras Day. The king of carnival, this is a Mardi Gras tradition, is killed sitting in his throne during the live parade from a balcony. Skip gets assigned to the case, even though she's not a detective. Skip grew up in and adjacent to this high society world that this novel focuses on. In fact, she takes a lot of flack for it in the police department. But Skip has completely turned her back on that whole world. She wants nothing to do with it. So here, the man who was killed was the father of a girl she went to school with, nice private school. So she is forced back into this high society world. It's a great mystery. There are lots of unexpected twists, but it is also a love story to New Orleans. Not just the setting, not just the place, but the people, the social strata there, which is a big part of life in New Orleans. The foods, the architecture, the music, it's all in here. And it just, for me, it was like the book was filled with Easter eggs for me. And I kept reading lines out loud to my husband of places we had been or things that we remembered, and traditions there. But I imagine even if you've never been to New Orleans, this setting, this place is just so unique and so rich that it really adds a lot to the novel. So I am so happy I reread this. Thank you, Kat and Laura, for hosting the Mardi Gras Readathon and reminding me that I had this book on my shelf. Loved the reread, and that also counted for several spaces in the Mardi Gras bingo card. Actually, I counted homegoing for royalty because back in the 1770s, in the early days in Ghana, there were kings and queens among the different empires there. So Mardi Gras morning I counted for set in New Orleans, set on the Gulf Coast, and music. There was mention, of course, of king cakes and balls, but they weren't really big elements of the story. So that landed me with 7 spots on my bingo card to finish with. But more importantly, really loved this reread. My next audiobook in February was another one for Black History Month that I knew nothing about, Jollof Rice and Other Revolutions. This was published in 2022. Another review audio that I downloaded from the publisher and didn't really know anything about. So as you can see in the subtitle, this is a novel in interlocking stories. The author is, I've been practicing, Omolola Ijeoma Ogunyemi. I think I said that pretty close to the way it's said. I'm sure I've got don't have the Nigerian cadence, but this is set in Nigeria. It is about, essentially, the focus of the novel is about 4 girls who meet in boarding school when they're 11 years old. These 4 girls become lifelong friends, and the different stories, some are set in the past, and you see more of their childhood or even their ancestors and other family members. Other stories follow them into the future, into their adult lives. The reason I also have the print book is because I got partway through the audiobook and I was treating this basically as short stories that might have some links. But I realized partway through I was missing some of the connections because the Nigerian names were unfamiliar to me. And I got to a point in one of the stories where I was like, I've heard this name before and I should know who this is. So I went to my library, I got the print book, and being able to see the names in print and how they were spelled and go back in the book and look at the previous stories, that helped me better understand the connections. And once I did, I realized how intricately connected these stories are. It's really this beautiful, intricate web of stories about these four girls, their pasts, their futures. There's a tragedy that happens while they're at school that affects all of them for the rest of their lives. The very first story, you can see with each story, it tells you who the main character is and the time. So this first story runs from 1897 to 1931. It is about Adoma, who it took me a long time to realize how that first story fit into the others. It wouldn't have if I had been reading the print book. I wasn't paying enough attention. On the other hand, I loved listening to the audio because there's two narrators, a female and a male narrator. They are both excellent. They just bring these stories to life with a Nigerian tone and cadence. It's all in English. There are some Nigerian words sprinkled throughout, but listening to it on audio was very immersive, which I really enjoyed. But I also liked having the print book so I could see how the stories interrelated. The last story, so it starts in 1897. The last story is in 2050, where all four characters come together again. And it's a bit dystopian, which I found really interesting, complete departure from the rest of the book, which is why this worked well as separate stories that interlock. You could see the roots of some of these dystopian elements in our world today easily. And so it wraps up and you see the next generation as well. So really enjoyed Jollof Rice and Other Revolutions, a novel and interlocking stories. Definitely recommend this. It was another great book for Black History Month. I haven't read much set in Nigeria before, so I really enjoyed getting to know this place and its people. There's some travel all over Africa. In fact, this connected with the other books that I read this month because one of the characters, when she's traveling with her mother as a child, goes to Ghana and tours Cape Coast Castle, which, as I said, figures prominently in the beginning of Homegoing. And it also only just occurred to me today as I was preparing this wrap-up that this book is actually quite similar to Last Summer on State Street because it is about four young girls. And there's a lot of coming-of-age stuff here, although it also goes into their adult lives and even looks at aging. But that focus on the friendship of young girls is here as well. Oh, and as I said, Homegoing is also, to some degree, a novel told in interlocking stories. So interesting to see those connections, but each of these books is very special all on its own. And finally, I finished the month with a wonderful audiobook for my book club, Whistling Past the Graveyard by Susan Crandall. As you can see, I had to resort to CDs because I waited too long to request it from the library. But I loved this book. Can't wait to discuss it with my book group. It is about, this is another, again, I didn't realize this, lots of little girl narrators this month. This is narrated by a 9-year-old girl named Starla in 1963, Mississippi. So at the beginning of this novel, Starla is living with her grandmother in a small town in southern Mississippi. Her father works on an oil rig. Her mother is in Nashville, has been since Starla was about 3 years old. So she barely remembers her mother. I think she last saw her mother when she was maybe 5 or 6. Her mother is supposedly in Nashville to become a famous singer. Well, to become a singer, Starla thinks that she's famous because she's a 9-year-old girl. But Starla's life's pretty difficult. Her grandmother is not very kind to her. She's very strict. And at the beginning of the novel, Starla does something. She's a very impulsive little girl. She does something to get herself in trouble. Her grandmother is threatening reform school, as she often does. And there's a bully at school, and Starla punches him in the nose and actually breaks his nose. And she panics because she thinks, this is it. I'm going to be sent to reform school. The police are coming to get me. You know, she is terrified. So she runs away from home. So her plan is to hitchhike to Nashville, having no idea that it's 600 miles away. Her plan is to live with her mother. Luckily, the first person Starla encounters is a kind person, a Black woman named Eula. Keeping in mind this is 1963 in Mississippi, so the racism is extreme here. But Starla's a sweet little girl. She and Eula actually bond. They endure many, many difficulties and challenges together on this journey to Nashville. Life-changing challenges. This novel is very much about this special, unique relationship between this little white girl and this Black woman in 1963 Mississippi. And it's a beautiful story. The audio was excellent. The narrator did a great job of capturing the Southern cadence and way of speech. It's not hard to understand. It's very easy to understand, but things like the way they say Coca-Cola instead of Coke or Coca-Cola. Really enjoyed the audio. I was kind of cramming, not kind of. I had to skip all my podcasts for a week and just listen to this because I didn't get it until Sunday and book group was Thursday. But that actually ended up really good because I was completely immersed in the story. And while I didn't choose this book, it was my book group selection, it turned out to be another good choice for Black History Month because Starla's the narrator, but you get Eula's perspective as well here as a Black woman in 1963. So so that worked out great. So I had an excellent reading month in February, and now I've got 2 more books that I am in the middle of that I will be able to finish in March. I would love to hear about your reading month. What did you read in February? What was your favorite book? These were all so good. But if I had to choose a favorite, it was probably Homegoing, which as soon as I finished it, I said to myself, this will be on my top 10 books of 2024 list. So let me know what you read in February, what your favorites were.